On today's show, the Capitals are 4-0 on the preseason with a 4-3 victory over the Jackets.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi. I've covered the Capitals for the past 3 seasons for Locked On and various other outlets before that. I'm also the host of the weekly show called The Capitals Minutecast, available wherever you find your podcasts. And as always, I want to thank you for making this your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, the Capitals continue in their winning ways as they pick up a 4-3 victory over the Columbus Blue Jackets in some preseason action. And I know they say it's, don't read too much into the preseason games. It's not about wins or losses. It's more about player assessment. But a good measuring stick tonight, right? As the Capitals were playing more of their younger talent, while the Blue Jackets were playing more of the players that you expect to see in the opening night. It got a bit close, but the Capitals walked away victorious. How did they get that done? A bit later, we'll talk about bubble battles. Listen, I think that some players are maintaining and getting better, while some players are kind of getting pushed to the side, and it seems quite apparent that they probably won't make the final cut. And then in the final segment, we'll talk about waiver concerns, and more specifically, Vincent Iorio's waiver concerns. But let's just dive into it here, talking about the Capitals downing the Jackets in Columbus. And a nice victory. And off the top, I said that it was primarily young players for the Capitals. But to be clear here, there was veterans in the mix as well. But there was more young players for the Capitals than for Columbus. And it was good to see the players that I think we knew were good continue to get better. I'm talking, about Andrew Crystal, for example, and some players like Ethan Frank, like I talked about, that I think that we need to see more. And I think to a certain extent, he might be running out of time with the Capitals. But let's just dive into it. A nice victory, like I said. And Tom Wilson doing some great things out there, the captain in waiting. As we know, after Alex Ovechkin hangs up the skates, that Tom Wilson is going to be the captain of your Capitals. And he helped lead the charge in a game that had everything from, momentum swings. It had big hits. You had fights. Hello, Tom Wilson's in the mix. There's a good chance there's a fight. And then you had the kind of game where the veterans made statements and the kids, they did what they had to do to try to grab the spotlight, and they did that. So let's start with the big man, number 43, Tom Wilson. And what does the guy do? He picks up a Gordie Howe hat trick. If you're not familiar with that, that's a goal, an assist, and a fight. He did all 3 of those things, and an engaged Tom Wilson. And, his reputation continues as being a tough guy, a guy that is going to stick up for his players. He is the sheriff of the Capitals, that if you are going to try to push someone around, in tonight's case, Ivan Miroshnichenko, then you're going to have to answer to me. And to be clear here, the fight out there was a whole lot about nothing, as it was just kind of, where they grab each other's jerseys and kind of push. There was a couple jabs in there, but both players walked away primarily unscathed. And it wasn't just a show out there. Talking about Tom Wilson, he scored on a play around the net where he positioned himself perfectly. And that wasn't it, scoring and getting and contributing that way is huge. He set up another with a slick feed, and then he dropped the glove sticking up for Miroshnichenko after a hit. That's leadership, and that is ultimately why Tom Wilson is going to be the captain of the Capitals after Ovechkin. and made a big impact. And it's good to see him in the lineup because as good as it is to see the young talent, it's good to see the pillars of this organization rise up. And Tom Wilson did just that. And, a team that is leaning in a younger direction, they need their leaders. And Tom Wilson is the kind of guy that fits the bill with a goal, an assist, 2 points, and a shot on goal. Pretty good production from the big man at number 43. And, Connor McMichael was the one that opened the scoring, kind of. It did appear at first that it was deflecting a point shot from David Gucciardi, where if you were watching the broadcast, it did seem apparent that he was the one that scored the goal. But as it turns out, Connor McMichael got the tip there, tipped it in. A little bit of a tip up front. That's what you want to see from him. But that's what Connor McMichael does, right? He is the guy. If you take a look at last year, gets the greasy goals, does whatever it takes to get production. If you listen to yesterday's show, if you're an everydayer, I talked about what Ryan Leonard needs to do. Ryan Leonard could take a page from Connor McMichael and some of the things that bring him success. And then you have the man himself, Andrew Crystal, making it very interesting. Gets another goal, strikes on the power play, and this guy is making a case that if you're sending me down, are you sure you really want to do that? What else do I have to do to prove myself to you than to contribute every time I'm out on the ice? Whether it's a goal or just, going out there with confidence and getting involved in the play, he has done the great things. And I'm going to hear primarily offensive production, right? And that's what it's all about. Andrew Crystal, we want him scoring goals, and that's what he did. Again tonight, like I said, on the PP, he finds the seam, a puck comes his way, and boom, back of the net money for Andrew Crystal. Production galore out there, and he is racking up goals in this young preseason. I guess we're a ways along here, but there is still more preseason games to play here. And I know preseason goals don't mean anything, but this is a dress rehearsal for a lot of these young guys that are fighting for very limited roles on this team. And Andrew Crystal, for me, checked the boxes yet again. And again, like I've talked about, it's the continuation. It's not, he played well in one game and then disappeared in the other one. He continues to go out there and play with confidence and looks like he fits in. And that's half the battle, like I've said about him, is looking like you fit in. It's not like you're behind a step or two or you're out of position. Andrew Crystal, right here, right now, looks like a professional NHL player. And I want, everyone else to buy into that. And, and I'll talk about that a little bit later is, the feeling is amongst certain people in the NHL, writers, beat writers, that kind of thing, that he's going to get squeezed out because if he does find a role on this team, it's going to be in a limited role. And he would be better served playing in Hershey, where he'll get more playing time. I don't want it to come to that. I'm still banging that drum for Andrew Crystal, and I don't want to cave. I don't want to acquiesce to what other people are saying. I still see a great player. I think that if you watch the game tonight, you saw a great player. What has this guy done wrong? I mean, are we holding the youthful aspect against him? I know that Milano has killed it, and Hendrix Lapierre has done some good things as well. But let's not take any of that away from Andrew Crystal as well. Unless he falls completely on his face, I still am strictly in the camp for Andrew Crystal making the opening night roster. I know limited ice time and all the things that the people are saying about it. I hear that. Despite all of that, I'm holding firm that I would like for him to be in the opening night roster. Will I get my wish? I'm not Chris Patrick. I don't know. But if I was the GM, this kid has what it takes. And I want all of you to believe that as well. And, you take a look at Columbus, did climb back in with Boone Jenner getting 2 on the power play. And to be clear here, this wasn't a game that the Capitals won, handily. They won it. They generated some good offense, but Columbus had some good pushback. And I expect Columbus to be a better team this season as well. Not, the deplorable team that we have seen for years, that I expect them to see big steps forward. But taking a look at LT, he still is the man. There's the reason that he is the number one, making 36 saves on 39 shots. So quite a great evening for Logan Thompson in net for the Capitals. And that's what we want to see. We want for him to keep doing great things. I didn't, have any concern, really about Logan Thompson. I know that, he had some injury concerns and some inconsistent play last year, but big picture, if I'm painting it with a broad brush, Logan Thompson was the man in net for a lion's share of the season. And what we saw in net tonight, well, that continued from that as well. And look, the goals he gave up, I don't really, hang those on him. It was one of those things where there were, screens in front, cross ice passes on the power play. That's tough on any goalie, and goalies, aren't going to save all of those. And, but I think that he did a good thing. But, you take a look at what he did well, his positioning, his rebound control, it was all there. The elite skill is all there. And, for me, that's big because the Caps are looking for steadiness in net. You're only going to go as far as what kind of netminder you have. And I think that the Capitals, I know they play much more confidently with a netminder like Logan Thompson in there. I know I'm going to be rewinding time here quite a bit, but think about how the Capitals struggled with Kemper, and think about how they struggled with Samsonov and Vanacek. That there was a feeling, and I think there's a feeling now, but with the former tandems, like if I make a mistake here, it's finding the back of the net. Where I think, amongst Capitals players now, they want to play sound. But I think there's a feeling that if they make a mistake, a blunder out there, that LT or Charlie Lindgren is going to have their back. So that's a big thing. And I think that Logan Thompson is proving why he was worth a lengthy contract and the money. And then as well, Ilya Protas, man, just still making an impact. And I understand that these guys are not all going to find a spot on the roster. Very few of them will. But what I am going to say is they're all making an impact for the most part. A little bit later, I'll talk about players that need some work. But a big highlight, Ilya Protas scores off a 2-on-1 feed, was a sneaky nice play. And it just shows you that he's putting in the work to stand out, a lot like his brother did. So big takeaway, feeling good about it. Capitals walk away from this one 4-3. The young guns came to play. And the veterans, I'm talking Logan Thompson, I'm talking Tom Wilson, had a big impact in this game as well, right? That it wasn't exclusively the young players, but for me, that's what it's about. At the end of the day, I know what I have in Tom Wilson, right? And I know what I have in Charlie Lindgren, I know what I have in Tom Wilson, and I know what I have in Logan Thompson. For me, it's about the young players and seeing if they can maintain and sustain, right? That, I sing the praises of Andrew Crystal, and he continues to do great things. Ilya Protas continues to do great things. So that's what I want to see. I want to see if they can maintain and even get better as the preseason goes along. Because what I've said about the preseason holds true, that these games are more about assessment than wins and losses. But let's be clear here. It's fun to win, isn't it? And I think it's very telling that if your team is winning, even if it's the preseason, that things are going the right way. The defense is dialed in, the offense is contributing, and you have rock solid net minding. All big things in the Capitals' success thus far. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about bubble players and roster battles. Yes, it has not got any easier as far as the roster battles are concerned. I'll discuss straight ahead. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's why there is Monarch Money. It's an all in one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy to use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. The thing I like about it is I was able to see where I was spending my money wisely and where I could use some work. Saving for retirement, good. Spending too much on sports memorabilia, not so good. And also planning a financial future together if you have a significant other in your life. I think you're going to love it. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNHL. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in the second segment of today's show, we're talking about bubble battles. And, I guess, going into this preseason, this camp, I was hoping that it would be easier. Why isn't it good if all these players play well? Yeah, it is, but it's that going to make it that much more difficult when you have to cut these players. Inevitably that's going to have to happen. Andrew Crystal is playing really well. Sonny Milano is playing really well. Hendricks Lapierre, they're not all going to be able to stick, and that is what is going to make it difficult. When, inevitably, some of these players are going to have to clear waivers. Some will be able to send directly to Hershey. But in any event, it's a luxury. I say that half in jest because it is a really great position for the Capitals to be in, to have so many elite level prospects. I talk to people that are fans of other teams around the NHL. They wish they had the kind of problem that the Capitals have in prospects. So let's talk about that in the second segment. We're talking about roster battles, guys that are fighting for that last spot, or maybe even trying to make enough noise so the coaches have to think twice before cutting them. And the player tonight, there's always one player that pops out, and tonight it was Sheldon Rempo. He was a guy that I talked about that the Capitals acquired. And, to be clear here, I'm going to be willing to bet that, many people that are listening to this podcast are probably not too familiar. But what did he do on the night tonight? 7 shots on goal. That's good. Now, would it have been better if he found the back of the net? Of course, but 7 shots on goal is good. And, you take a look at it. This guy comes in first game with the Caps in the preseason and just goes beast mode, full throttle. And like I said, 7 shots on goal. Nobody else had that kind of volume. So, like I said about these bubble battles, it's not hyperbole. This isn't Dan just overselling it. When these players are given their opportunities, they seize the day. And Sheldon Rempo seized the day. 7 shots on goal. That is pretty good, if you ask me. And the thing about it was he wasn't just noticeable. He got bumped up in the lineup as the game went on. By the third, he was skating on a line with Dylan Strome and Anthony Beauvillier. That's trust. That is making a big impression right out of the gate. That's the coaches saying, hey, you've earned a look with better line mates and see what you can do. And what did he do? He knocked it out of the park. And again, like I talked about Crystal, he didn't look out of place. So file that one away. Rempo is not just a camp body. He is a guy that wants to make the final cut, like all of these guys, of course. Like I talked about earlier in the show, Andrew Crystal, putting up big goals in the preseason. and that confidence, and the looking like he belongs, and fitting the bill, right? Scoring goals is huge, but not looking out of place, is one of those things as well. Now a reality check, though. It's still likely he starts the season in Hershey. Bang, bang, bang. If you're listening on the audio side, that is me mimicking banging my head against the microphone because I'm frustrated, right? That is what we're hearing more and more, because the Capitals are crowded at forward and they want him playing big minutes, not, playing limited time with the Capitals. And, but why? Why does he have to play limited minutes? What has he done wrong? And the proof's in the pudding. Everyone that's knocking him thus far is they're like, well, this is the preseason, but he played against a lot of NHL talent for Columbus tonight, and he looks like he fits the bill. But man, he is making it tough for the coaching staff. That much I know for sure. And Ilya Protas as well. When I talk about that, these players are not making it any easier. I say that with all sincerity. What did he do tonight? A goal and a shot on goal. So picking up a goal in a game when given an opportunity is great. And he has a lot of the attributes, scoring goals, of course, a good thing, but his big body. And, if he could grow into that frame a little bit more, that would even be better. But, he really showed some good hands in that 2-on-1 finish, and is really starting to look like his game is rounding out quite a bit, winning faceoffs and skating with more purpose, and I think that, in the not too distant future, we are going to see him on the big team. And that's the kind of development that you want in a young center, right? And then you've got David Gucciardi. This is one of those names you might not expect to hear too much, but he got rewarded with a point on the McMichael goal. And that was one of the tough things in this game as well, is it did appear that he was the one, in fact, that scored the goal. But as it turns out, it was Connor McMichael. And another guy, he was doing things the right way, moving the puck efficiently, playing with some jump from the back end, checked a lot of boxes, making the most of his opportunity, right? And, it's not just the forwards, that there is battles on the blue line as well. And Dylan McIlrath playing some bigger minutes tonight to see what he has in the tank. And, the thing about when we're talking about Dylan is it's never one of those things where we're talking about flashy plays. Because he's physical, he's steady, but he's not the guy that's necessarily going to wow you in that way, right? He's the kind of insurance defenseman you love to have in your system. But, here's the thing with guys like Crystal, Rempo, Protas, and Gucciardi, they're all giving management something to think about, that it is not going to be easy. Because, like I say, the preseason isn't just about evaluating who's NHL ready. It's about figuring out who you can sneak through waivers. And that's the difficult part, right? Is that you might have to try to get lucky in a lot of ways and get some of these guys into Hershey. But I'm here to tell you, the Capitals are going to end up losing some of these players. And, to a certain extent, you think to yourself, maybe they made a mistake, right? Exposing these guys. That we understood the gravity of the situation when you have a guy like Vincent Iorio on this team, or you have a guy like Clay Stevenson on this team, that it's good to see them get big minutes in the NHL camp. However, if there's not a spot for them on the NHL roster, then they have to face waivers. And in some cases, they're just going to be too much of an upside and too irresistible for another team to pass up on. And I think that there is a distinct possibility that if, in fact, Vincent Iorio, for example, we'll talk about in the next segment, if he is put on the waiver wires, that he'll get scooped up. Same thing goes for Clay Stevenson. And that's what it's about here. Make no mistake about it. These guys want to find a spot on the Capitals, preferably, right? But bigger picture for them, I think that if you could get an honest answer from them, it's even more about finding a spot somewhere in the NHL. If it's not the Capitals, somewhere else. That I think for a lot of these guys that are younger guys, that maybe have some NHL experience or NHL and AHL experience, that they want to put the coach bus behind them. They want to talk about going around and flying around in chartered jets, right? I think that is the big thing about these young players that are trying to find a spot. But like I said, not making it any easier on the coaching staff, as the players, the prospects that played in this game tonight primarily are doing good things. But when you talk about players that need to improve, I'm talking about Ethan Frank, 2 shots on goal the entire night. This guy is definitely on the outside looking in. I'd like to polish it a little bit more and say that, it's not the case, but it is the case. And it is going to be a tough road for Ethan Frank to find his way to her, on the big team, right? I'll talk about the big team, and what if he doesn't make the big team and he goes on waivers, what about him then? You got to think that someone's going to take a flyer on Ethan Frank as well, just because, his history of scoring, putting up big goals in Hershey, but also a guy that has the need for speed. So that's a tough thing. I think that for Ethan Frank, he would have to show something, big time in the remaining, preseason games here to make a big enough impression that the Capitals would even consider having him on the team. If you're asking me, he is the biggest player that is on the outside looking in, is Ethan Frank, and a guy with a lot of promise, a guy that filled a role on the big team last season. But we haven't seen it thus far. And it's too bad in a lot of ways because, I had high hopes for him, and I think the Capitals did as well. But at the end of the day, you have to pick the player that is the most qualified. All right, so coming up here after the break, we'll talk about Vincent Iorio and waiver concerns. I'll discuss straight ahead. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you do not want to miss. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right, pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love how FanDuel gives me many different ways to play. I've built parlays, tried player props, even followed the live line games during the game. It makes watching football even more exciting when you've got a little bit more riding on the action. Now listen, on any given Sunday, it's exciting if the Commanders are playing, or maybe you're a Ravens fan. But say you want vested interest in all of the games. Open up the FanDuel app, put a little bit of money on the game. All of a sudden, they got that much more exciting. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today to get started. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The best way that you can help grow the show is to subscribe to Locked On Capitals on YouTube and comment anything down below. So in the final segment of today's show, we're talking about Vincent Iorio, a player that it should be familiar to you if you're not familiar. He is a prospect that has been in the organization for some time, and there has been a feeling that he is the answer on the blue line for the Capitals, but it hasn't been an easy step for him to take. And some of the things that Spencer Carbery and his staff wanted him to work on was putting on some weight. So he wasn't driven so easily off the puck, that he could assert his power a little bit more. And he did that. And what we have seen from Vincent Iorio so far is encouraging, but yet another guy that is going to have to face the waiver wires. How is a guy like Vincent Iorio handling the pressure? Because it's easy to say in these interviews that it doesn't bother me, but he has acknowledged that those thoughts start to seep in, and how he plans to handle dealing with it. And the one thing that we have seen from Vincent Iorio is he has been a real steady guy in camp, playing responsible minutes, blocking shots, moving the puck well. And he's doing the right things, from a guy that is trying to make the roster. However, the problem is the top 6 on defense is set. You got Carlson, Chychrun, Roy, Sandin, Faravari, Van Riemsdyk. That's your group, right? And then you've got Declan Chisholm in the mix too. So where does Vincent Iorio fit? That's the question. I think that the easy answer would be, of course, that he's going to be one of the extra defenders. We remember last year, it was Dylan McElrath and Alex Alexiev. Alex Alexiev, as we know, went out to Pittsburgh. And now it's Declan Chisholm and ostensibly, Dylan McElrath. But, you take a look at Dylan McElrath, he's 33 years old. He is a physical player, but he is definitely not a perfect defender, of course. Otherwise, he would find his way into a lineup somewhere in the NHL. Do the Capitals have a better option in Vincent Iorio playing, even if it's an extra for the Capitals? Absolutely. Do the Capitals want a prospect that they have such high hopes for, like Vincent Iorio, to get limited ice time, to spend a majority of the season watching the game from the press box? I don't think that's the case. And that is such a common story, a thread that runs its way through this preseason. It's something I've spoke about more this preseason than I have in any other preseason. But it's a tough thing. And the even tougher thing for Vincent Iorio is that if he does not land a spot in the big team, he will be exposed to the waiver wires. And there's a very real chance that another team out there says, yeah, we'll take a shot on a young right shot defenseman with an NHL upside. And I definitely think that a player like Vincent Iorio could find a spot in the NHL right now. I think he's got the skill set. Is he elite? Not yet, but I think that he is still growing in his game. I don't think that what we have seen in Vincent Iorio is fully realized yet. And that's what you kind of expect from these younger prospects. And now Vincent himself has been honest about it. He said, yeah, it's on my mind a little bit. But he's been taking things day by day, he said in a press conference, trying to control what he can and leaning on a family to stay grounded. That's the human side of camp, that we look at these guys as hockey players, right? That they're doing these kind of things and all they care about is hockey. But, it is the uncertainty about your future, I think, is one of the things that starts to seep in. And we don't always talk about it, but, in a lot of cases, these players have their careers on the line. And, one transaction can change their lives in a big way. They're on the Capitals, a team with a lot of upside, but he gets put on the waivers and say he gets picked up on a team that's not so good. You went from being on an organization with feeling pretty confident about your future to like, where do I go now? Great. I'm in the NHL, but I'm playing on fill in the blank team in the NHL, which has little to no chance of going anywhere. Happy about the NHL paycheck, but maybe not so happy with the team. Those are the kind of things. So what do the Capitals do? Option one, keep Iorio up, even in a limited role. Give him third pair minutes, maybe some shelter time, keep him in the NHL. Option two, and this is the one that is, full of the most risk, is try to sneak him through waivers and hope nobody claims him. It's not going to happen. I'm here to tell you that's an option. It's not going to happen. So that's where they're at. And see if there's value out there, if the Capitals, somehow, some way could orchestrate a trade. But none of these are perfect. And the other teams are going to know as well as that he is going to be exposed to waivers. So I think that a trade is something that is pretty remote. Anything is possible, but I see that is a remote possibility. So as far as Vincent Iorio is concerned, the thing I would tell him is concentrate on the things that you can concentrate on. And that is playing your best game each and every game that you're out there, and let the rest of it take care of itself. If for some reason he doesn't make the big team, if for some reason he goes on waivers, he's going to land on his feet because he has had a good camp. And I have no doubt that there is, like I said, a team out there somewhere in the NHL that is looking for the services of a Vincent Iorio. His skills are right there. Like I said, not elite yet, but definitely some room for growth there. But big picture, I think that he could fit the bill with a team in the National Hockey League. Listen, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, your only daily year-round podcast covering the Capitals. And I want to thank all of you that listen on the audio side and watch this on YouTube. You are what makes this show successful. When you're done here, head on over to Locked On NHL, as they have you covered 5 days a week, available wherever you find your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It is your team every day. My name is Dan Holmi, and I'll talk to you again next time.